Thanksgiving is supposed to be about gratitude, right? But in my family, it's more like a scheduled performance. Everyone arrives in their best sweaters and fake smiles, dishes in hand, pretending we all haven't spent the past 11 months pretending each other doesn't exist. I used to think it was just normal. Families argue, siblings fight, parents play favorites. But as I've gotten older, I've realized there's a fine line between dysfunction and outright cruelty. And my family, we don't just cross that line. We cartwheel over it. My name's Owen. I'm 32 now, and if you'd asked me 5 years ago where I saw myself today, I would have said, anywhere but here. I left home at 18, worked my way through college, lived in a string of cities chasing stability and, honestly, distance. Distance from the guilt-tripping phone calls, the backhanded compliments, the constant reminder that I wasn't one of them. Because even though I'm the oldest, I was always the outsider. The quiet one, the sentimental one, the one who didn't take after dad's get-it-done attitude or mom's flair for appearances. My younger brother, Grant, 3 years my junior, had always been the golden boy. He inherited dad's loud confidence, mom's gift of manipulation, and neither of their tendency to second-guess themselves. That combination made him magnetic to them. And I was the shadow in the corner of every photo. It wasn't always like this. There were moments, flashes of real affection growing up. Dad would take us to the cabin in the woods every summer, just the three of us. That old log place with the creaky screen door and the moss-covered dock became my sanctuary. I still remember sitting on the end of the dock with Dad, our fishing poles forgotten in the water, just watching the sun go down. He'd tell stories about how he built the place with his own hands before Mom came along. "This cabin will be yours someday," he said once, when I was 12. "Keep it safe, okay?" I nodded so hard my neck hurt. I believed him. But after Dad passed, things shifted. Subtly at first. Mom started redecorating the house, removing every photo of Dad that didn't have her in it. She stopped visiting the cabin. Then came the legal stuff. The will. The trust. The slow erosion of Dad's memory until all that was left was a box in the attic labeled Robert's junk. And me? I started noticing how often my voice didn't count in decisions. When Mom sold Dad's old truck, she told me after the fact. When she gave away his vinyl collection, she laughed that you wouldn't care about those old records anyway. When I asked about the cabin, she changed the subject. That brings me to this Thanksgiving. I hadn't planned on going. In fact, I'd RSVP'd with a polite thanks, but traveling's tough this year. But something changed last minute. I got a call from my cousin Lydia, a rare neutral party in our family circus, and she told me, almost as a warning, "You should be here. They're planning something. I don't know what exactly, but it has to do with the cabin." My stomach dropped. That place was the only thing left of Dad I felt connected to. I still visited once or twice a year, keeping the place clean, checking the pipes, doing repairs. Quietly, without asking permission, because I'd never needed to. I thought we all knew whose it was supposed to be. So I showed up, drove the 6 hours back to my hometown, stood on Mom's doorstep with a pumpkin pie from a bakery and knots in my stomach. She opened the door and looked surprised. No hug, just a once-over and a chirpy, "Well, look who decided to grace us with his presence." That tone, always so light, so performative, like her words didn't carry barbs. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon and turkey and unresolved tension. Grant was already there, of course. He strode over with that smug grin he's mastered since high school and clapped me on the back. "Didn't think you'd show, man," he said. "Thought you were too busy playing lumberjack in the woods." He laughed at his own joke. Mom smiled politely. I forced one back. The room felt colder than it should have, even with the oven on. Dinner was set for 7. The usual crowd trickled in. 2 aunts, a few cousins, Lydia, and her boyfriend. I helped carry and folding chairs, set the table, tried to stay out of Mom's way as she barked directions. "Not there, Owen. The good plates go on the big table. Please don't move the candles. Honestly, just sit down. You'll only make it worse." Each sentence delivered with a sugary smile that would fool anyone not used to her. Then, around dessert, it happened. The moment where the simmering tension cracked open just enough for the ugly truth to peek through. We were passing around slices of pie, apple, pecan, something gluten-free for Aunt Sheila, when Mom, completely unprompted, said, "Well, it's official. We finally sold your father's old cabin." There was a pause. The kind that makes your skin prickle because you know everyone's watching your reaction. I didn't say anything right away. I was trying to process the words. Sold? Without telling me, Grant leaned back in his chair, fork in hand, and smirked. Yeah, took long enough. Honestly, surprised anyone wanted that dump. Another chuckle. A few awkward laughs from the table. Mom just sipped her wine. I cleared my throat. You sold the cabin? Mom nodded, setting down her glass. It was just sitting there, Owen. Falling apart. Honestly, it was more of a liability than anything. And you're always so busy. We didn't think you'd be interested. You didn't think I'd be. I stopped myself. Looked down at my plate. Did Dad's will say who it was supposed to go to? She waved a hand. Oh, that old thing. It wasn't clear. Something about family use, shared property. But really, that's impossible to enforce. Grant and I talked it over with the lawyer and decided it was best to sell it while it still had value. Grant snorted. Like you could even afford it anyway. Something twisted in my chest, like a rubber band pulled too tight. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. I just stared at them, at their faces, so casual about it all. As if they hadn't just erased the one piece of my father that still felt untouched. My memories. The summers. The promise. And that's when it hit me. They didn't know. They didn't know who they sold it to. I smiled. Small at first. Just enough to make Lydia tilt her head, confused. I picked up my fork, cut a piece of pie, and calmly said, Congrats on selling it to me. The room went still. Forks dropped. Grant's face froze mid-smirk. Mom blinked, her wine glass halfway to her lips. And that's when things really started to unravel. There was a silence you could slice through like warm pie. I've been in awkward family moments before, plenty of them. But this wasn't awkward. This was electric. Heavy. Like the air itself knew something had shifted and was waiting to see who'd explode first. I didn't say anything else. Just sat back, took another bite of pie like I'd casually announced I'd bought a new car. But in reality, my pulse was pounding in my ears. I could feel Grant's stare boring into the side of my face. Mom's mouth hung slightly open, like she was stuck buffering. Lydia blinked twice and subtly nudged her boyfriend, who whispered, Wait. What? It was Mom who spoke first, of course. Don't be ridiculous, she said, a hollow laugh creeping into her voice. You didn't buy the cabin. That's not funny, Owen. I looked up, met her eyes. No joke. Right, Grant cut in. And I just bought the Eiffel Tower. Good one. He chuckled, but his voice had a sharp edge now. Less teasing, more uncertain. He hated not being in on the joke, especially if the joke was on him. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out a folded document, and slid it across the table like I was laying down a royal flush. It was a copy, just a few highlighted sections, and the closing signature. I'd brought it on a hunch. Not to cause drama, but because some part of me knew this dinner was going to end in some kind of war. And if it did, I wanted to be prepared. Mom didn't reach for it. Grant snatched it first, eyes scanning the top. His jaw clenched. You're kidding me. Mom leaned over to look. Her expression shifted from disbelief to something much harder to read. Some cocktail of confusion, betrayal, and irritation. You how? Lydia's boyfriend let out a soft whistle. You bought it before they even knew? I nodded. Few weeks ago, I saw the listing go up. Called the agent directly. She was shocked how fast I made an offer. Closed in under a week. But how did you know? Mom started. I check the local listings sometimes, I said, keeping my voice even. Especially around the lake. I get alerts. When I saw the address, I didn't hesitate. Why didn't you say anything? She asked, and now the performance kicked in. Offended mother, wounded and confused. You could have at least told me you were interested. We would have discussed it as a family. I held back a bitter laugh. Like how you discussed selling it. She had no response to that. Instead, she sighed dramatically, as if I were the one being unreasonable. It's just a house, Owen. No, I said quietly, it's not. Grant shoved the paper back toward me. You really think this makes you look good? You sneak behind everyone's backs and buy up the property like some vulture? That's real classy, man. You mean like how you two sold it without telling me? I countered. We didn't think you wanted it. Mom snapped. I tilted my head. Then why not ask? The silence returned, colder this time. A few cousins shifted in their seats. Aunt Sheila muttered something about not wanting to get involved. Someone dropped a spoon. Mom stood up, smoothed her blouse, and walked toward the kitchen under the pretense of getting more whipped cream, though the bowl was still full. She always retreated when control slipped from her hands. Grant, on the other hand, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, trying to reassert dominance. Fine. You bought it. Congrats. But don't act like you've won something. You'll regret it when you realize how much maintenance that place needs. Leaky roof. Rotting porch. Pipes freeze every winter. It's a money pit. That's why we sold it. I shrugged. I know. I've been the one maintaining it for years. His face twitched. What? Yeah. I've been driving up every spring and fall. Cleaning it out. Winterizing it. Doing repairs. On my dime. Not that anyone noticed. You had no right to do that. Mom's voice rang from the kitchen, sharp and cold. It wasn't yours. Maybe not legally, I said, louder now so she could hear. But emotionally? Spiritually? Dad gave it to me long before he passed. You both just ignored that because it didn't fit your plans. Don't get dramatic, she said, walking back into the dining room. Your father never put that in writing. If he wanted you to have it, he should have made it official. I think he thought you'd honor his wishes without needing a contract, I replied. Her eyes narrowed. Then he didn't know me very well. There it was. A hush fell over the room. Even the sound of silverware scraping against plates stopped. I felt that line slap me harder than anything she'd ever said. Not because it was surprising, but because it confirmed what I'd always feared, that to her, honoring Dad's memory was never the plan. It was an obstacle. Grant stood up now, too, as if taking a cue. This whole thing is ridiculous. You think just because you have some childhood memory of the place, you're entitled to it? Grow up, Owen. The real world doesn't work that way. I stared at him. You mean the real world where people lie to family and sell property behind their backs? Oh, get over yourself, he scoffed. You always act like some wounded little orphan. Newsflash, you're not special. Dad's gone. Move on. Something cracked in me. Not anger. Not grief. Just exhaustion. I pushed my chair back slowly and stood. You're right, Grant. I'm not special. But I'm not stupid either. And I'm done pretending this family treats me like anything more than an inconvenience. That stirred murmurs. Mom frowned. No one's ever said that. You didn't have to, I said. It's in every decision I'm excluded from. Every phone call not returned. Every time you pretended I didn't exist unless you needed something. You want to talk about real world? In the real world, people communicate. They show basic respect. You've both failed at that for years. Grant opened his mouth to argue, but Lydia beat him to it. He's not wrong, she said quietly. All heads turned. She rarely spoke up, but now she sat up straighter. You guys treat him like he's just this side character in your perfect little family play. It's been like that since we were kids. Lydia, Mom said sharply. No, I'm serious, she said. You always made him feel like the outsider. Even when Uncle Rob was alive, you'd ignore what he wanted just to push your own agenda. It's not right. She doesn't know what she's talking about, Grant muttered. I know enough, Lydia replied. Mom looked like she wanted to scream, but she reined it in. She had an image to maintain. Always did. Well, she said with forced calm, this has clearly gotten out of hand. Maybe we all need to take a breath then. I already took mine, I interrupted. Back when you sold Dad's cabin out from under me. Everything that happens next? That's just the consequences. She didn't reply. Neither did Grant. I left the room. Didn't storm out. Just walked calmly down the hallway toward the foyer. Behind me, the murmurs picked up again. Lydia followed. She didn't say anything, just gave me a look that said, finally. I stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the framed photos on the wall. Not one had Dad in it anymore. Just Mom, Grant, the cousins. My absence was so consistent it felt deliberate, and I realized then it probably was. I was never supposed to come back, but I had, and I wasn't just back. I'd come with receipts, and next time we talked about the cabin, they'd realize this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I didn't leave the house that night, not physically, anyway. My coat was half on, keys in hand, when Lydia gently touched my arm and said, Don't give them the satisfaction of thinking you ran. So I stayed. Back at the dining table, the cleanup had started, but no one was talking much. The clinks of forks and spoons stacking on ceramic plates felt unnaturally loud. Grant had disappeared somewhere upstairs, probably to call his wife and complain about me, and Mom was doing her usual silent fury routine, wiping down spotless counters like they'd personally offended her. I sat back down at the far end of the table, far from where Mom had returned to tidying. Lydia slid into the seat next to me, offering me a half-smile and an extra piece of pecan pie. "Still warm," she said. "Shame to waste it." I appreciated the gesture, but my appetite was gone. My mind kept replaying the scene. Grant's smug disbelief, Mom's icy tone, her final, damning words. Then he didn't know me very well. That line stuck like a sliver under my skin. Dad had trusted her. Trusted that she'd honor what he said, even if it wasn't etched in legal stone. I hadn't fought her at the time because I believed she was grieving, because I thought, naively, that his memory would mean more than money or power. But it was never about grief. It was about control. And now, I was beginning to suspect it always had been. "You okay?" Lydia asked after a minute. "No," I said. "But I will be." That was all I allowed myself to say, because deep down I was afraid that if I said more, I'd unravel. And I didn't want to cry in my childhood dining room with a plastic pumpkin centerpiece smirking at me. The evening limped along. Cousins said their goodbyes awkwardly. Hugs were exchanged half-heartedly. And soon the house was mostly quiet again. I assumed Grant had left without saying goodbye, which was fine. He was always better at slamming doors than saying words that mattered. But just as I was pulling out the futon in the guest room, yes, they hadn't even made space for me in a real bed, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hope the cabin's worth it. You'll see what you really bought soon enough." No signature. But I didn't need one. It was Grant. I stared at it for a full minute, heart sinking slowly. I thought about replying, asking what that meant. But I didn't want to give him the satisfaction. So I put the phone down, sat on the edge of the futon, and stared at the worn-out bookshelf across the room. That's when I noticed something strange. A familiar binder, poking out from the shelf where Mom kept old tax returns and board games missing pieces. It was blue, labeled Cabin Maintenance 2004 to 2015 in my dad's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in years. He used to write everything down, repairs, expenses, even fishing conditions on the lake. I pulled it out, opened it. Pages and pages of meticulous notes. Roof patching dates. Well inspections. Replaced screen door hinge. Owen helped. July 2010. I flipped through it, running my fingers over the scrawled ink. I was almost smiling when something odd caught my eye. In the very back pocket was a folded sheet of legal-sized paper. I opened it, and my breath caught. It was a handwritten letter, dated 6 months before Dad passed. Addressed to me. I started reading, my hands trembling. "Owen, if you're reading this, I guess your mom's finally gone through these old files. I hope it's because she's looking to pass the cabin on to you, not because she's trying to bury what I've written here. I know I never put it in the will. I should have. I let your mother talk me out of it, said it'd complicate things, that it should all go to the family equally. But I always intended the cabin to be yours. You were the only one who ever cared about that place like I did. You showed up. You cleaned. You listened. You saw it for what it was, not just some old shack. That place is yours in every way that matters. If they try to sell it out from under you, I hope you fight for it. Not just because I want you to have it, but because I want you to know, I saw you, Owen. You were always the one I counted on. I just wish I'd said that more clearly before I ran out of time. Love, Dad." I sat there for what must have been 15 minutes, staring at the paper as tears blurred the words. My father's voice echoed in my head, each sentence hitting me like a wave. He knew. He knew Mom would try something, that Grant would follow her lead. And he'd tried, in his own quiet way, to leave something behind that would anchor me when it happened. But he hadn't hidden it well enough. Because if I just found this letter tonight, that meant Mom either never opened the binder, or she did, and buried it on purpose. That thought flipped a switch in my brain. I stormed downstairs, gripping the letter, my feet light with adrenaline. Mom was in the kitchen again, wrapping up leftovers with robotic precision. She barely looked up when I entered. "Could you not slam the stairs?" she said coolly. I held out the letter. Her eyes flicked to it, then to my face. And I saw it, the briefest flicker of recognition. "You knew," I said, my voice low and shaking. "You knew he wanted me to have it." She turned back to the counter. "That letter isn't legally binding." That was all she said. No apology. No explanation. Just a cold dismissal. My hand clenched around the paper. "He trusted you to do the right thing." "Well, then he was naive," she said without turning around. "Your father was a good man, but he wasn't a smart one when it came to family. He thought sentiment was stronger than practicality. He was wrong." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You hid this from me." "I filed it," she said. It wasn't my job to hold your hand through inheritance fantasies. I stepped forward. You sold it out from under me, behind my back, after lying for years, and then mocked me at Thanksgiving like it was some kind of punchline. She finally turned, face hard as granite. Because you were always the child who needed to be taught how the world works. I thought if you didn't get the cabin, maybe you'd finally move on. Stop clinging to the past like it owed you something. My heart was pounding now. So you tried to erase me. She didn't deny it. You made it easy, she said. I stood there, shaking, letter still in hand, and realized that the betrayal wasn't sudden. It wasn't one decision. It was years of erosion, small exclusions, quiet rewrites of our family's history. And now, a final, calculated erasure of the only thing that connected me to the version of my father I still carried with me. The next day, I left early. No goodbyes. Just slipped out before sunrise with my bag, and that letter clutched in my coat pocket. But I didn't drive straight home. I went to the cabin. When I pulled up, frost clung to the windows and the grass crunched underfoot. The lake was still, glassy, the dock dusted with early snow. I unlocked the front door, my front door, and stepped inside. Everything smelled like pine and dust and memories. I lit a fire, sat on the same old couch where Dad and I used to eat cereal and play cards. And I realized something. They hadn't just tried to take the cabin. They tried to take him away from me, piece by piece, memory by memory. And if Grant's text was any hint, they weren't done yet. But neither was I, because now, I had more than just the deed. I had the truth, and I was about to use it. The fire crackled low in the cabin fireplace, and I sat motionless, staring into it like it had answers I hadn't figured out yet. The letter lay open on the coffee table beside me, Dad's handwriting lit orange by the flames. The air was still, too still, and the silence was the kind that presses on your ears. Outside, a breeze stirred the frosty branches of the tall pines surrounding the lake, the only sound for miles. It should have felt peaceful, but it didn't, because now I knew what I was up against. And for the first time in a long time, I felt small, powerless, like a grown man walking back into a childhood nightmare and realizing the monster was real all along and had learned to smile. I stayed in the cabin that day and the one after that. I didn't answer calls, not even Lydia's. I couldn't. I was afraid if I heard her voice, the dam would break. And I didn't want to break. Not here. Not in his space. The cabin was cold and the plumbing temperamental, but it was mine. And I took small comfort in that. I chopped wood, fixed a loose hinge on the back door, resealed a drafty window. Quiet, mindless tasks to keep my hands busy while my head spun. At night, I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, replaying every conversation from Thanksgiving like it was on loop. The mockery, the dismissal, the bitterness in Mom's voice when she said Dad didn't know her. She was right. He didn't. And neither did I. On the third morning, I woke to find the mailbox open and a legal-sized envelope stuffed inside. No postmark. No stamp. Someone had driven up in the night and left it there. Inside was a letter from a local attorney, Franklin and Hughes, formally requesting my immediate attention regarding the property at Lake Heron, known as 221 Pine Shore Road. That was the cabin. The letter claimed there was reason to believe the transaction resulting in your acquisition of said property was based on misrepresented intentions and prior familial agreements. It asked, no, advised, that I return ownership to the rightful family trust to avoid a civil dispute. I read it twice, then a third time, and then I laughed. A short, bitter, breathless sound. Because there it was, the next move. Grant had lawyered up. It didn't matter that the sale was legal. It didn't matter that they had listed the property themselves, and I had purchased it fair and square through public channels. They couldn't stomach that I had outmaneuvered them. So now they were playing dirty. The real kicker? The letter was dated before Thanksgiving. They'd known. The whole show, Mom's faux surprise, Grant's mocking disbelief, had been a performance. A manipulation designed to corner me, guilt-trip me, make me second-guess my decision after they failed to stop it legally. I dropped the letter on the table and just sat there, stunned. For hours. By nightfall, I realized I hadn't eaten all day. My stomach growled, but the thought of food made me nauseous. I poured a glass of water, took one sip, then poured it back out. I was unraveling, and I knew it. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the old twin bed with the knotty pine headboard Dad carved, listening to the wind whip around the cabin and wondering how I'd gotten here, really gotten here. Because if I was being honest, this wasn't just about a cabin. Not anymore. It was about being erased, scrubbed out of my own history by the people who were supposed to protect it, who were supposed to protect me. When Dad died, I didn't fight. I let them decide what was best. I tried to keep the peace, to avoid being difficult. I told myself it wasn't worth burning bridges. But now, I was standing in the ashes of a bridge they burned behind my back. And it hurt. It hurt more than I'd expected it to. The next morning, I shaved. Not because I needed to, there was no one around to notice, but because I wanted to feel like myself again. I put on a clean flannel shirt, opened the cabin windows to let in the cold air, and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow notepad. And for the first time in days, I started to plan. It wasn't a grand, movie-style revenge fantasy. No, I'll ruin them monologue. Just a list. A very quiet, very steady list. 1. Find a real estate lawyer. Not someone like the guy who helped close the deal. Someone experienced in family property disputes. Someone who could help me draw a hard line in the sand before they tried to drag me into court. 2. Make copies of everything. The letter from Dad. The maintenance binder. Emails with the real estate agent. Photos of the cabin. The work I'd done. The invoices I'd paid over the years. I would document everything. Not for them, but for me. So when the gaslighting started, I'd have proof. 3. Talk to Lydia. She was the only one who saw through them. The only one who had been quietly warning me for years. If anyone knew more about what was going on behind closed doors, it was her. 4. Don't lash out. That one was the hardest. I wanted to yell, to scream, to call Mom, and tell her she'd failed as a parent. To tell Grant that I finally saw him for what he was, a selfish, greedy manipulator who never wanted a brother, just an audience. But I knew that's what they expected. They wanted me to break, to snap, so they could point and say, see, he's unstable. He doesn't deserve it. So I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I would be calm, strategic, quiet, like always, but not weak. That same day, I drove into town and found the public records office. Asked for copies of the property deed and transfer. Asked to verify the chain of title. Everything came back clean. My name was on every document. I was the legal owner. But I knew that wouldn't stop them. On my way back, I stopped at a small coffee shop I used to go to with Dad after fishing trips. It was run down now, nearly empty, but the same guy, Paul, still worked the counter. He recognized me immediately. Owen, right? Been a long time. I nodded. Yeah. He gave me a free coffee and asked how Dad was. I told him he'd passed a few years ago, and Paul's face fell. He was a good man. Always had time to talk. Yeah, I said quietly. He was. We sat for a bit, and out of nowhere, Paul asked, that cabin still standing? Yeah, I said. I just bought it. His eyebrows rose. Didn't know it was for sale. Not many people did, I muttered. He didn't pry, just nodded. Well, if you need a good handyman or some help fixing it up, I know a couple folks. Your dad did a lot for people around here. They'd be glad to repay it. I thanked him, left a generous tip, and stepped out into the cold with something I hadn't felt in days. Support. Small, quiet, but real. Not everyone had forgotten who my father was. Not everyone had forgotten who I was. That night, back at the cabin, I sat by the fire and finally called Lydia. She picked up on the second ring. Took you long enough, she said. I needed some time. Yeah, I figured. There was a pause. Then she added, they're panicking, by the way. What do you mean? Mom called me yesterday, asking if I thought you'd be willing to reconsider. Then today, Grant called and said he's concerned about your emotional state. It's all theater, Owen. They're trying to build a case before they file anything. I swallowed hard. You think they really will? Grant's ego won't let him stop. And Mom, she hates losing. I rubbed my forehead. Then I guess I need to be ready. You are, she said. You're just not used to believing it. That line stuck with me long after we hung up. She was right. I'd spent my whole life letting them define me. And now that I was finally stepping out of that shadow, I didn't recognize myself. But I was starting to. Every plank I repaired in the cabin, every document I photocopied, every hour I spent alone in the cold silence of the woods, these were bricks. Quiet ones. Foundation stones. I wasn't just preserving a place. I was building something. My spine. My story. And it was finally starting to stand up straight. The days got shorter and the nights longer. Snow fell heavier across Lake Heron, blanketing the trees, the dock, and the roof of the cabin in thick white silence. but I didn't mind the cold anymore. In fact, I welcomed it. Every time I woke up to frost on the windows, it reminded me I was still here, still standing, still fighting, and I was getting stronger. The first change came quietly. I hired a real estate attorney in town, Mara Lewis, a no-nonsense woman with steel gray hair and the kind of voice that could silence a courtroom. She wasn't cheap, but she knew how to handle disputes involving family inheritance and property manipulation. Her words, not mine. We met in her office 2 days after the letter from Franklin and Hughes. I handed her everything: my deed, the cabin purchase agreement, Dad's handwritten letter, photos, old texts, even receipts from the last few years of me maintaining the place. She flipped through the stack, expression unreadable. Then she looked up at me and said, "They don't have a case." I exhaled so hard I almost laughed. "Really? You bought it fair and square, they listed it publicly, and the ownership transfer was clean. Whatever emotional angle they're trying to play, it won't hold in court. Especially not with this letter from your father. It's not legally binding, but it supports the narrative that you had reason to believe the cabin should have been yours." I nodded slowly. "So what do I do?" She smiled faintly. "You breathe. Then you send a response. Firm, polite, and very clear. You don't owe them anything, Owen, but we'll make sure they know you're not backing down." I walked out of her office that day taller than I'd walked in. And the funny part? Nothing had actually changed, but everything felt different. For the first time, I wasn't playing defense. I wasn't just reacting. I was choosing, moving, building. The rise wasn't a montage of flashy wins or viral success. It was subtle, intentional. Every step a quiet middle finger to the people who thought I'd fold. I got the plumbing at the cabin fully winterized with the help of Paul's handyman friend, Tom, a guy with a limp, a beard like a snow shovel, and a soft spot for old places. "Your dad taught me how to set tile," he said one day while replacing the cracked backsplash in the kitchen. Didn't charge me a dime. Said it was my turn to pass it on. I found myself tearing up at that, which Tom pretended not to notice. We worked together for 2 weeks, slowly restoring the cabin without changing its soul, replacing rotted porch boards, reinforcing the roofline, even sanded and restained the dock, just in case the ice melted early and I wanted to sit out there come spring. During breaks, I'd sit at the table and sketch ideas in the same yellow notepad I used for my plan. Some pages were legal notes and calendar deadlines, but others became something else. A vision. See, the more time I spent in the cabin, the more I started to think, why stop at protecting this place? What if I built something with it? The cabin wasn't just a memory. It was a story. My father's story. Mine. And I wanted to share it. But not with the people who tried to erase me. With the people who needed it. So I got to work. I bought a decent camera and a used laptop from a pawn shop in town. Cleaned out the attic and turned it into a tiny editing nook. Taught myself how to shoot and cut footage, how to adjust lighting and frame a shot. I started small, videos about cabin restoration, how to re-insulate old windows, how to reseal cedar planks, DIY lake cabin survival tips for winter. I posted them on YouTube under the name Heron Revival. The channel grew slowly at first, 20 subscribers, then 50. But people started commenting, thanking me, asking questions. One guy from Montana said he used my window sealing method to fix his grandfather's fishing shack. Another woman messaged me to say her dad used to take her to a cabin just like mine, and my video felt like going home. That message floored me. I realized I wasn't just fixing a building. I was building connection. And the best part? I didn't have to ask anyone's permission. I posted once a week, then twice. Upgraded my mic, started narrating little stories about Dad while I worked. He used to say the porch creaked because the cabin was sighing after a long day. This is where we kept our tackle box, and the secret bag of candy he always pretended not to eat. The more I opened up, the more people responded. Views grew. Comments doubled. One video hit 10K. Then another. Then I got an email from a local newsletter asking to interview me about the man preserving Heron Lake's forgotten cabins. I nearly deleted it, thinking it was spam. But I said yes. And suddenly, things snowballed. The article went live in early January, titled "Son Restores Late Father's Cabin," and the internet falls in love. It painted a picture I hadn't dared to hope for. They quoted my video about Dad, shared screenshots, even linked the channel. My subscriber count jumped overnight. I got invited to speak at a small community event in town. I stood in a church basement with folding chairs and a coffee urn in the back, telling strangers about why preserving the cabin mattered to me. They listened. Some even clapped. One older man came up afterward and said, "We need more people like your dad. And like you." That night, I sat on the dock, even though it was freezing, and cried for the first time in weeks. Not because I was broken, because I was healing. Slowly, steadily. I didn't tell Mom or Gran about any of it. I didn't need their approval anymore. The less I heard from them, the better. Until, of course, they couldn't help themselves. It came in the form of a voicemail from Mom. Crisp, polite, and so fake it made my skin crawl. "Owen, I heard about your little cabin blog, or whatever it is. That's cute. I hope you realize you're not the only one who loved that place. Your father was part of a family, not just your father. Anyway, call me back. We should talk before this all gets too out of hand." Too out of hand. They'd already sold the place out from under me, threatened legal action, tried to gaslight me into thinking I didn't deserve the thing he told me was mine. I didn't call back. Instead, I took the voicemail, the lawyer letter, the Thanksgiving video Lydia had secretly recorded on her phone. Yep, she got most of the conversation and uploaded them into a secure digital folder my attorney could access. Mara emailed me 2 words, "well documented." And life went on. I got a P.O. box in town for business inquiries. Sold branded merch, simple stuff, Hair and Revival mugs and beanies. I didn't make much, but it helped cover repairs. I started a Patreon, just to see, and within a month, had over 100 supporters who chipped in so I could restore the fireplace next. I found myself smiling more, sleeping better, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. Not of their judgment, not of their schemes, not of their silence. Because for the first time, I wasn't surviving their approval, I was thriving in their absence. And the icing on the cake? I'd just finished filming a video about rebuilding the cabin's old tool shed, complete with a funny story about Dad accidentally locking himself inside it one summer, when I got an email from a regional PBS producer. They were working on a series about rural preservation, and they wanted to feature me. My cabin. My story. I sat in stunned silence reading the email, the fire crackling softly behind me. My tea had gone cold. The wind was picking up outside, and snowflakes swirled across the dock. I read the email again. Then I laughed. A full, deep, honest laugh. Because the people who tried to erase me, they had no idea. They thought they'd sold a cabin. But what they really did was give me the stage I never asked for, and the voice I never thought I had. And now? Now I had the spotlight. And I was just getting started. The day the PBS producer visited the cabin, something shifted in me again, but this time, it wasn't personal. It was strategic. He arrived bundled in a thick wool coat and scarf, stepping carefully down the icy gravel driveway with a cameraman and a sound tech trailing behind him. His name was Charlie, early 40s, soft-spoken, clearly the kind of person who preferred being behind the scenes. But the moment he stepped inside the cabin, he looked around with this quiet awe, like he could feel the stories still clinging to the wood. "I don't think we'll need to fake anything," he said, almost to himself. "This place already speaks." The segment they filmed was short. Only 8 minutes for the regional special, but they spent all afternoon here, capturing every corner of the cabin, recording my voice as I talked about Dad's love for the land, the repairs I'd done, and the decision to preserve something old in a world obsessed with new. I left out the drama. They didn't need to know that this place had been nearly stolen from me, or that I was still fielding threats wrapped in fake concern from my mother every other week. But I could tell Charlie sensed something beneath the surface. After the shoot, as he sipped black coffee in the kitchen and packed up his notes, he said, "You've got something here, Owen. Something real. You ever thought about writing a book?" I laughed, because the idea sounded ridiculous. I wasn't an author. I was just surviving. But he tilted his head thoughtfully and added, "People care about more than cabins. They care about why we hold on to things." And that stuck with me. That night, after they left, I sat by the fire and thought about what I'd built, not just in the cabin, but online. The YouTube channel had passed 35,000 subscribers. The Patreon had reached $1,200 a month. Not millions, not fame, but stability. And more than that, leverage. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the overlooked son. I was becoming someone other people listened to. And that terrified my family. I knew it because the messages started coming more frequently. Short, manipulative texts from mom. Stuff like, your father would be ashamed of how you're weaponizing his memory, and it's not too late to bring the cabin back into the family name. Grant even emailed me once, attaching a grainy photo of the cabin's septic tank from 2015 with a snide. Hope you budgeted for a full replacement, genius. But the more they tried to needle me, the more I realized they were losing their grip. And when people start losing control, they get sloppy. One afternoon, I drove into town to meet with Mara again. She'd found something interesting buried in the Franklin and Hughes communications, something they clearly hadn't expected us to read too closely. A single line in a memo from their office assistant, referencing prior financial entanglements between Ms. Emery and the estate of Robert Emery Sr. That stopped me cold. Wait, estate? You mean the trust? Mara nodded. I thought it was odd too, especially because your father's trust documents don't mention a separate private estate. But this line suggests there was another account, possibly something unaccounted for in the probate process. We dug deeper. 3 weeks later, we found it. Or rather, she found it. Mara's intern, Claire, combed through the old financial records Mom had filed when Dad passed, and buried in a footnote on an old tax document was a mention of a joint custodial account, opened in my name, from when I was 17. A savings account, one Dad had contributed to for years, slowly and steadily. And apparently, one that Mom had quietly transferred into her name 6 months after his death, using a power of attorney that should have expired the moment he died. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to matter. $87,000. That money had been mine, and she stole it. I stared at the photocopied transfer slip like it was written in a foreign language. Mara sat quietly, letting me absorb the shock. Claire watched me carefully, probably unsure if I was about to cry or explode. I did neither. I just nodded, very slowly. She's going to regret that, I said. Mara tapped her pen on the desk. We can go after it, if you want. Legally, you have a case. A strong one. I thought about it. The courtroom. The fight. The fallout. Then I shook my head. Not yet. Because right then, I realized something else. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. This was about a pattern. She had always controlled the narrative. Moved the pieces. Redirected money. Decided who got what and when, and made you thank her for it afterward. But I wasn't a pawn anymore. I was a player now, and I was holding cards she didn't know existed. Back at the cabin, I began piecing it all together. I created a second digital archive, password protected, encrypted, stored on 3 separate cloud platforms under aliases. I backed up every message, every letter, every receipt. I even uploaded the old voicemail where Mom said, "He didn't know me very well." That line, more than anything, had become the cornerstone of my file. Because she was right. And now, I was going to use that truth to dismantle her game. The second thing I did was go public, quietly. I made a new video titled "The Cabin My Father Left Me," and how I almost lost it. I didn't name names. I didn't blame anyone. But I told the story. The real story. About how grief can be twisted. About family betrayal and silent battles. About fighting for something no one else sees the value in, because you know it matters. The video blew up. Within a week, it hit 250,000 views. Comments poured in. People shared their own stories of family manipulation, of siblings stealing inheritances, of mothers rewriting history. It struck a nerve, and the messages started to change. I began getting emails from local preservationists, authors, even a small production company that wanted to option my story for a documentary short. One woman from Vermont said she had gone through the same thing. Her mother had sold their family farm without telling her, and she fought to get it back for 3 years. "You're not alone," she wrote. "And you're not crazy." That line hit harder than any threat Grant ever sent me. Because that was the battle, wasn't it? To make you feel crazy for remembering what actually happened. To make you question whether you ever had a right to care. But I wasn't questioning anymore. I knew exactly what had happened. And now I had the platform to make sure everyone else did too. Meanwhile, Lydia came through in ways I didn't even expect. She dug through old boxes of hers and found a dusty camcorder, one that Dad used to record home videos. The tapes were labeled things like Heron Cabin 2001 and 4th of July fishing. I borrowed a converter and began digitizing them, one by one. There he was, Dad, laughing on the dock, calling me Captain Owen, as I struggled to reel in a fish half my size. Sitting on the porch in a folding chair, telling me about the constellations. Even one clip where he looked straight into the camera and said, "One day this'll all be yours, bud." I wept watching it, but I also got an idea. I edited the footage together into a 12-minute video titled Before It Was Mine. It was raw, unpolished, real, and it told the story better than I ever could with words. That video changed everything. It hit 1 million views in under 2 weeks. News outlets picked it up. Podcasts emailed me. Even a few family drama YouTubers started reacting to the story, speculating about what my mom and brother had done, even though I never named them. I didn't have to. The story told itself. And the more attention it got, the more power shifted. Because now, I wasn't just some guy who bought a cabin. I was a voice, a symbol. And for people like my mother, that was the worst-case scenario. Not only had they failed to erase me, they had accidentally elevated me. All because they thought I was weak enough to roll over. And as I sat on the dock one snowy morning, watching mist rise off the frozen lake, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. It wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be cruel. But it would be final. Because I had something now that they never did. A story that people believed. And the truth? The truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. It started with an envelope. Nothing fancy. No flaming sword. No legal bombshell delivered in a dramatic courtroom scene. Just a simple, cream-colored envelope, sent via certified mail to an address I knew by heart. My childhood home. The one where Mom still lived, and where Grant still parked his shiny leased SUV out front like a trophy he hadn't quite earned. Inside the envelope was a formal letter, professional, clean, and very deliberately worded. It came from Mara's office. It explained that recent evidence had surfaced proving a misappropriation of funds from a custodial account set aside by Robert Emery Sr. for his son, Owen Emery. The letter stated that a formal inquiry had been opened into the unauthorized transfer of those funds into an account held solely by Evelyn Emery, and that unless restitution was made within 30 days, civil litigation would proceed. Attached were copies of the financial records, the original account forms, the transfer documentation, and the notarized timeline provided by the bank. There was also a handwritten postscript from Mara, small and elegant. Sometimes the best way to burn a bridge is to let them light the match. It was both a warning and a gift. And it was only the beginning. I didn't expect a response. But she called. Of course she called. It came through as private number 2 days after the envelope was delivered. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened with headphones, sitting on the edge of my bed, the fire casting flickers of light across the wood-paneled walls of the cabin. "Owen, I got your letter. Or rather, your lawyer's letter. Very dramatic. But you're not thinking clearly. This isn't going to end the way you want. You're burning everything down, and for what? A pile of timber and a few YouTube views. Pause. Call me back. Let's talk before you make another mistake." I didn't call her back. Instead, I uploaded another video. This one was titled, What They Took. I didn't name names. Still haven't. But I told the story, finally, with every detail I'd held back before. The account Dad set up for me. The way it quietly disappeared after he died. The financial records we uncovered. I explained how sometimes the biggest betrayals don't come from strangers or enemies, but from people who claim to love you while quietly rewriting your story behind your back. I spoke calmly. No bitterness in my voice. Just truth. I let the facts speak for themselves. The internet did the rest. Within 48 hours, the video was trending. The comments section flooded with people who had been through the same. One woman wrote, "My sister forged our dad's will. I spent 6 years fighting it. Thank you for telling this." Another man said, "This made me realize I'm not crazy for cutting my mother out of my life. We don't owe loyalty to people who betrayed us." The video passed 3 million views by the end of the week. I never responded to my family. I didn't have to. They were already spiraling. Lydia, ever the quiet observer, sent me screenshots from the family group chat I hadn't been part of in years. She had remained in the group mostly to keep tabs, and now it was gold. "Grant, he's making us look like thieves to the entire country. Mom, no one will believe that money was his. It was for the family. He just found the paperwork first. Grant, his followers are sending me hate mail. They found my LinkedIn. Mom, he's playing the victim. He always loved being the victim. Grant, he's playing chess. And we're losing." That last line made me laugh. Because it was true. They were finally seeing the board and realizing they didn't know the rules. I made my next move quietly. No fanfare. No YouTube announcement. Just a letter, once again from Mara's office, sent to the Franklin and Hughes attorneys, officially requesting a cease and desist regarding the false claim of prior familial agreements over the cabin. The letter included video documentation of my father clearly stating his intent to leave the cabin to me, footage that had gone viral. It also pointed out that continuing to pursue this case under false pretenses would be viewed as harassment. The firm dropped the inquiry within 72 hours. Mara called me, trying not to sound smug. Turns out the opposing counsel saw your YouTube video, the one with the doc and the VHS footage. Apparently their own junior associate said, and I quote, "We are absolutely going to lose this." I smiled. "Let them watch," I said. "Everyone else is." I thought that would be the end of it. But there was one more twist. And this one came in the form of an email. Subject line, "Speaking request, New York Times event." At first, I thought it was spam. But it wasn't. The actual New York Times was hosting a regional storytelling event about legacy, inheritance, and the future of family-owned spaces. They wanted to feature 4 storytellers who had reclaimed family property against the odds. And they wanted me. I stared at the email, rereading it 3 times. It included a travel stipend, accommodations, and a small speaking fee. But that wasn't what made my heart race. It was the list of other speakers. One of them was a woman who had reclaimed her grandmother's bookstore after her uncle tried to bulldoze it into a parking lot. Another was a man who had fought his cousins in court for a barn that his great-grandfather had built by hand during the Depression. And now, I was going to stand beside them. I accepted immediately. Lydia helped me pick out a blazer that didn't make me look like I was trying too hard. We flew out together, her first time on a plane in years, and when I stood in front of that small, elegant crowd in the city, under warm stage lights and quiet murmurs of anticipation, I took a breath. And I told them the story. About a cabin. A father. A family that mistook quiet for weakness. And how reclaiming a place became reclaiming a life. The applause didn't thunder. It didn't need to. It was steady. Genuine. The kind that doesn't wash over you like noise, but wraps around you like a promise. Backstage, one of the event organizers approached me and said, "You ever think about turning this into a book?" There it was again. That word. Book. And maybe this time, I wouldn't laugh it off. I returned to the cabin a week later, the snow now melting off the roof in thick sheets. Spring was arriving. Slowly, but unmistakably. That same day, a package arrived in my P.O. box. No return address. Inside was a single item, a photograph. One I hadn't seen before. It showed me and Dad on the dock, maybe 10 or 11 years ago. He had one arm around me, and I was holding up a small fish, beaming. On the back, in faded blue pen, were the words. This is what mattered. Not the money. Not the title. Just this. No signature. But I knew the handwriting. It was Mom's. I didn't respond. Because revenge doesn't always come with a gavel or a wrecking ball. Sometimes it's the silence. Sometimes it's the calm. Sometimes it's the quiet knowledge that you won. Not just the property. Not just the argument. But the story. You kept it alive. And now? Now it belongs to you. The fallout came quietly. No fireworks. No breaking news headline. No screaming confrontation on a front porch. Just slow collapse. Like a rotting house finally caving in after years of termites. After the PBS feature aired and the viral videos continued to circulate, the narrative shifted publicly and permanently. I didn't need to name names. People connected the dots. The subtler consequences started trickling in, not because I called for them, but because sometimes, when you shine enough light on a lie, the truth doesn't need to shout. Grant lost a consulting client. Then another. He'd built a nice little career as a self-styled legacy advisor, helping wealthy families transition assets across generations. It was all branding, smoke, and mirrors, but it paid well, until one of his top clients messaged him a link to my YouTube video, what they took with the line, "This isn't about you, is it?" Even though I never said his name, the description fit too closely. Too many mutual connections knew too much. People talk. They always do. A month later, his contract with the real estate firm he partnered with wasn't renewed. By then, word had spread to the professional circles that mattered to him. Trust lawyers, financial advisors, old college friends who had once idolized him. His LinkedIn stayed up, but he quietly removed the job titles. When Lydia asked about him, all I said was, "He's learning what it feels like to be invisible." As for my mother, Her downfall wasn't loud either. It was slower, more personal, and I suspect that hurt her more. You see, Mom had spent her life cultivating this image, a graceful matriarch, pillar of the community, host of elegant charity dinners and tasteful brunches. She knew everyone worth knowing, and everyone knew her, or thought they did. But when the videos started spreading, especially the one with Dad on the old camcorder saying, "One day this'll all be yours, bud," something broke in her perfect reflection. She tried to push back subtly. An email to me, which I ignored. A public Facebook post that read, "Sometimes people rewrite history to serve their own ego. Some of us choose to stay silent out of dignity." It got 2 likes and a comment from her bridge partner that said, "Hope you're okay." But silence, in this case, wasn't interpreted as dignity. It looked like guilt. And people began to remember little things. How she talked about cleaning up Robert's estate. How she never once mentioned her oldest son in social gatherings. How the family cabin had mysteriously been sold, then ended up in Owen's name after a bidding war that didn't exist. The final nail came at her own garden club's spring fundraiser. Someone asked her why she wasn't involved in Owen's preservation project, especially since the Heron Revival channel had just announced it would be hosting a community weekend for fans and locals to visit the newly restored cabin. Mom smiled and said, "Oh, I don't really keep up with Owen's little videos. It's more of a hobby, really." To which someone else, probably without even realizing, replied, "Well, the New York Times didn't call it a hobby." That was when she realized she'd lost the room. She stopped attending public events not long after. Meanwhile, the community weekend at the cabin went better than I ever could have imagined. We had over 60 visitors, followers, neighbors, fans of the channel, who drove from as far as Michigan and North Carolina just to walk the floors I'd restored and stand on the dock where my dad taught me how to fish. We served cider and grilled sandwiches on the fire pit. Lydia handled logistics like a pro, and even Tom, the handyman with the snow shovel beard, came by to give mini carpentry demos. A little girl asked if she could plant a flower on the edge of the woods so the cabin has something alive always watching it. I nearly cried right there. Toward the end of the day, an older couple approached me. The husband had silver hair and walked with a cane. The wife wore a red flannel jacket and held his arm as they climbed the front steps. "You're Owen?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. She smiled. "We were friends of your father. Rob was one of the best men we knew. Always talked about this cabin. Always said it'd be yours one day. I wish I'd known him better," the man added. "But I feel like I did now." That's when I realized. This place had become more than just mine. It was Dad's again. And this time, everyone could see it. A month after the event, the civil suit settled. Mom's legal team, still trying to save face, offered to amicably resolve the issues surrounding the misappropriated custodial funds in exchange for confidentiality and non-disparagement. Mara was ready to drag them through court, but I told her to take the deal. Not because I wanted to protect them, but because I didn't need a courtroom victory to prove anything anymore. The world already knew what they had done, and I'd already won in the only court that really mattered to me, my father's legacy. They transferred the full amount, $87,000, plus a small interest adjustment. Mara smiled when the wire came through. "You could put that toward expanding the property. Buy the neighboring lot." I shook my head. "No, I know what I'm going to do with it." 6 weeks later, I launched the Robert Emery Cabin Fund. Its mission was simple: help other people like me preserve family-owned property that's at risk of being lost, sold off, or forgotten. We started small, one cabin in northern Vermont, owned by an elderly woman whose kids wanted to bulldoze it for a condo project. We helped her set up a trust and restored the roof. Then another, an old farmhouse in Kentucky with a leaky foundation. I shared each project on the channel, and people showed up. Donations, volunteers, stories. I'd tapped into something bigger than myself, and it felt good. More than that, it felt right. I haven't seen Mom or Grant in over a year now. No texts, no calls. I heard through the grapevine that Grant moved out of state. Tried to start fresh in Arizona, maybe Florida, no one's really sure. One of our cousins said he's selling insurance now. I hope he's found some peace, but I doubt it. Grant never learned how to live without a spotlight. Mom still lives in the same house, alone. Lydia stops by every few weeks, mostly out of obligation, and says it's like visiting a museum. Everything preserved in perfect silence, but no warmth left. just curated memories and air that's too still. She once asked Lydia if I'd ever come around. Lydia told her the truth. He doesn't live in your story anymore. As for me, the cabin is home now. Not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally. The old guest room is now an office. The attic holds a filming setup. The basement finally has working insulation. And the dock? It's got 2 new chairs, one for me and one for the past. Sometimes I sit there and talk to Dad. Not because I think he can hear me, but because I want to remember who I am, who he helped me become. Last week, I was walking through the woods behind the cabin when I found something strange, half buried under leaves and time. It was a rusted metal sign. Bent. Faded. I brushed the dirt away and read the old, flaking letters. Private, family only. I smiled. Then I carried it back to the cabin. I cleaned it, sanded it, repainted it carefully, one letter at a time. And now, it hangs over the front porch, just above the old wooden swing where Dad used to sip coffee in the mornings. Only now it reads, "Family is who shows up." And me? I showed up.